Matteo, welcome to BizTalk. It's my great pleasure having you with me today. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for the invitation, Max. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is mine. So let's talk about yourself, a bit of your background, who you are, what you've done in your life so far.
Yes, of course. So, I was born and raised in Italy. I'm half American because my mom is from the US. That's why I went to a British school here in Italy. And after that, I continued my studies in UK. After a brief experience at Bocconi University, I continued studying business management in London. After I graduated, I had a couple of working experiences, first in VC. And after that, I decided to swap sides of the table and sit on the entrepreneurial side by joining a startup, which today is a success story because it's a consolidated company in the UK. It's called High Octane Ride. If you want to go and look it up, it's a pretty interesting concept of training using high intensity training. But soon enough, I realized that I wanted to start my own business. Because together with my partner Sandro, we identified a big gap in the Italian market within the occupational health and vaccination medical sector. So that's why I came back, let's say, to Milano, where I am right now.
Before talking about your venture, where do you like to be the most? On the venture side or the startup side?
Well, I have to say that when I was sitting on the venture side, it was very interesting and informative. Perhaps a couple more years in the venture capital business would have saved a couple of mistakes that are inevitable for any entrepreneur, I think. But it's far more exciting for me to run my own business. It's just a constant motivation. It's a drive that I think I cannot compare with any other job or work that I have ever done before.
Very exciting. It's very exciting. I do both, and I have to be honest, being an entrepreneur is the most exciting thing you can do in life by far. You can't sleep too much, but it's okay. Anyway, it's a good practice as well. Make mistakes, right? This is how we grow.
Absolutely.
Successful, making quite a few mistakes, especially at the beginning. It's better to do it at the beginning than when you start scaling and growing, right? So let's talk about Ambimed.
Absolutely. So as I was mentioning before, we identified this gap in the market in the occupational health and vaccination sector of the medical business in Italy, where we have normative driver, which is the legislative decree 8108, which basically requires company to comply with specific laws that require companies to implement medical services for their employees in order to prevent them from developing an illness which is correlated with their job description. This is something which is pretty standard and ordinary here in Italy. But what we have done different from our competitors in this market is that we have developed the travel medicine component of occupational health. This means that Ambimed is the first and only company in Italy that can supply companies with traveling personnel with all the correct prevention. So occupational health services, all the ordinary services that are part of that kind of business, we provide them on the whole of the Italian territory through a network of clinics that we call Ambimed points. And as well as our occupational health doctors, we have doctors that specialize in infectious diseases. They allow to examine and analyze the risks correlated with traveling abroad and provide companies with the necessary information in order to use the correct prevention through vaccinations or through education, counseling, or other forms of medicine that are typically used in order to guarantee safety to your personnel when they travel to endemic areas. For example, Africa, South America, or Southeast Asia are subject to a series of tropical diseases, we call them, that require very specific know-how in order to go there safely. Therefore, we decided to create this network because in Italy, we actually have quite a few big Italian companies that work abroad in the construction business, in the oil and gas business. I mean, we're very requested abroad, us Italians.
Let me, before we go forward, let me ask you, what exactly is your service to this big company that goes abroad with employees? What exactly, why do they come to you, and what you deliver to them?
Well, what we deliver to them, for example, is the possibility to access vaccinations privately. So Italy is very characteristic in terms of how the medical sector is divided. We have the public sector, which is very strong in Italy because all Italians can access free healthcare, also employees of companies, but there's not always availability. And if a company, for example, wins a tender today and they need to send their personnel to a different country next month, they perhaps will not find the availability they require in order to meet those needs. Therefore, Ambimed has developed a network of private vaccination centers, which are pretty complex to set up because there's a series of authorizations, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. Italians are famous for their bureaucracy, and this indeed is one of those very bureaucratic markets. We have undergone a series of processes on the legal side already 2 years ago, and we're now finally receiving the authorizations to allow our clinics to offer these services. For example, to give you a specific example, the yellow fever vaccine for some countries is compulsory. If you do not have the yellow fever vaccine.
I know very well. I've been sick for a week.
Okay, fantastic. So you learned on your own skin. So, for example, that's a ministerial authorization that you need, and it requires 18 months to obtain it, and a series of prerequisites that you need to prepare for. So we structured a company in a way to offer in the occupational health business to companies that have traveling personnel this extra component, and that makes Ambimed unique because not only we can offer all these services, we can offer them as a network. So if, for example, a company has different business units in different offices in different cities, we can still provide them with uniformity in the way we deliver our services. And in the medical sector, this is really important because as of today in Italy, there's companies that have offices in different cities, but they have different providers. And this sometimes creates confusions and inefficiency. For example, economies of scale is a no-brainer on this kind of topic, because of course, if you're speaking to the same provider for your 4 offices in 4 different cities, instead of 4 different providers, economies of scale are a direct consequence. And we're very competitive from this point of view. And this allows us to penetrate the market, commercially speaking, in a very efficient way.
So your primary market now is Italy, I suppose, but as well, are you talking, moving, you're already outside Italy, Europe, probably outside Europe. So what's the business model to scale your business outside? And if you want to talk about more the Italian market, please do it.
Yes, of course. I'll spend a couple more words on the Italian market because we talked about the B2B cluster of clients. There's also a B2C cluster, which we target in a very different way. Today, we have travelers that book online. They're traveling. 80% of travelers book online. And 80% of that 80% is managed by OTAs, online travel agencies, which is an oligopoly. We all know eDreams, Booking.com, Lastminute.com. It's 5-6 big companies that hold that 80% of the online booking in the travel market. We are currently developing an algorithm which will allow when travelers access one of these online travel agencies through their web platforms to understand the location of the traveler and where he's going to. Based on these 2 variables, our service will be proposed to the traveler as an ancillary service during the checkout of his booking. This means that if, for example, you are in Milano and you're booking a weekend, a weekend, I wouldn't say a safari weekend, 2 weeks of safari, and you require vaccinations to go to that destination, when you're checking out, you will get a proposition, automatic proposition. And this is a very effective way to target the B2C market because it has a very low CAC impact.
Is this working only for vaccination, which means COVID, or also for all is needed to go from one country to another? Let's say Africa, for example, maybe you need, as you mentioned before.
Well, of course, also other services, but vaccinations, let's say, is the main part. Then, for example, if you go to Africa and as you told me, you've been there, there's the problem with malaria there. And the malaria prophylaxis, for example, is not always the same. If you go for 2 weeks, you can take pills. But if you're going to Africa for work for 6 months, you can't take pills for 6 months. Therefore, we provide, in that case, counseling. So it's workshops where we teach literally employees how to behave in order to prevent malaria.
Is your service a long-standing? What does it mean? I mean with this, if I'm moving from Italy to Africa, from Africa to US, and from US, can I still rely on you?
Well, if you're traveling from Africa to the US, probably we will not manage to target you if you are a leisure traveler. But if you're a business traveler and your company is a multinational corporation that has offices in Italy and therefore probably has a contract with Ambimed, because as I told you, we are unique at the moment, fortunately enough, you could still access that information from our database. It depends on how the company is structured.
Okay. Again, Italy, how big is the market in Italy and how big is your market in Europe?
Well, this is a great question, actually, because the so-called TAM, the total available market, is very difficult to calculate because there's no official data that you can access in terms of reports that provide this kind of information. We have managed to make some assumption based on crossing data from, for example, volumes of travelers that have been provided to us by airline companies. COVID-19, for instance, for us was a very big opportunity in terms of business because, of course, the awareness of travelers towards safety when traveling has raised compared to before. And this allowed us to get in contact with many airlines from a client-supplier point of view. And we have now access to this data. So we're now finally managing to view with primary research elements what this market is worth. So to answer your question, in Italy, if we were to make an assumption that 50% of travelers are actually correctly vaccinated because they are returning to Africa, they're returning to South America, well, the other 50%, 80% of that 50% will be targeted through the online travel agency strategy that I just mentioned before. And companies, in the end, we count them on two hands. In Italy, we have about 10, 12 multinational companies that do travel to these countries. Of course, volumes are very important because we're talking about thousands of employees per company, but there are not that many. So it is a niche, but it's a niche where we do not have competition. And that's why, at the moment, at least, we're being so successful in generating new clientele.
After I want to talk with you about pivoting, because I remember when I came in the first place in your office and you told me that your company actually is a spin-off and after COVID came, right? But before going to this, are you going to move to Europe in a very substantial way, which means are you going to target France, Germany, Spain, like you are now penetrating Italy?
Well, in the future, I think it will be the natural development of the business to become international, because what we offer is not only services in Italy, but we offer also international medical assistance. This means that if you are abroad and you require, for example, a medical evacuation, our partners own a company which has air ambulances. Therefore, we can count on our partners' support to provide that kind of service. So we intend operating on an international, let's say, basis, but I don't know when we will be able to open offices, for example, in France. or in Germany. Surely our business model will be working also there because the market logics are the same. I believe that also Germans, that's what comes out of our data. Also Germans book their flights and they're traveling online. But then you need to build all the infrastructure, so the clinics with the authorizations, and that's not something that we have looked into yet. I do not know, for example, what is required to obtain the same authorizations we have in Italy and Germany. But it's ongoing. I think we'll be going there if everything goes all right.
I mean, it's unusual for me talking to startup, having few years life, which is yours, has, and already be almost profitable, making revenue as you are, which is very unpleased because revenue still actually profit still makes sense, right? Because we are getting used to having startup, having billions of revenue, but also having billions, multiple billions of losses, which is, it's a bit concerning. But I would like to talk with you first of all of pivoting, because you've done quite a very strong pivot and very successful, which is beautiful to talk about because you can show and teach and give some help to other founders that maybe they need to pivot, they need to understand when pivot is not that easy, and also give some numbers about your KPIs.
Of course. So indeed, COVID was a big surprise for us because moving in the travel medicine business, traveling is one of the major markets that was compromised by the COVID-19 pandemic. So in the beginning, I have to admit, we were pretty afraid that that was going to be the end of Ambimed, but actually it was the contrary, because if we consider 90% reduction in volumes of travelers, well, that remaining 10%, they all had to conduct a medical service, COVID-19 test, before traveling. So being a market leader in Italy in this really small niche allowed us to have all travelers in Italy turn to us and ask us, Ambimed, what do I have to do to travel to Russia next week? And we would give them that information, and of course also provide them with information on where to go and get that service. So what we built is a network of clinics where COVID-19 tests are available currently. Today we have 650 clinics in our network with over 2,000 nurses in the whole of Italy that are available to conduct home tests. So if it's not possible for our patient to go to our clinic, we have the clinic go to the patient. And thanks to this, let's say, structure, we are now working with many airlines. For example, today we got a signing with Cathay Pacific, which we were working on for a couple of months. So we work with Neos Air. It's going well. This is why in the beginning of the call I was saying that COVID, in terms of business for us, was a very strong opportunity to create brand awareness, mostly. Now our brand in Italy is very well known. And when there's any doubt with anything that is connected to medicine or health and traveling, people know they can pick up the phone and call us, give us a call. So that was our pivot. It's pretty no-brainer, but as I told you, we were not convinced, but we feared for the future of Ambimed. When COVID-19 arrived and traveling was down to minus 90%, it was pretty scary times.
Traveling and hotels, they've been by far the most, almost destroyed from the pandemic. But anyway, you have done a very great job, and now you're leveraging on your pivoting and growing a very healthy business. So can we talk a bit about your KPIs?
Yes, of course. Well, let's say that this year we were aiming at closing our funding in March. We didn't manage to do that because, of course, investors with this whole situation, let's say they're a bit shy, and I understand them. They're waiting to see how the market will be moving in the next months. So we had to go through organic growth. The pivot that you just mentioned, that I explained to you, allowed us to sustain the organic growth. So to answer to your question, we had a KPI on the investor deck of 1.2 million in revenues for this year. but having consolidated the investment of 1 million that we're currently working on. Without the investment, we managed to get to 600K, which is very positive, with over 150K in margins, which is a good percentage, considering that we did not have the possibility to invest that much on marketing and on digital developments, because as you can probably tell, we need to invest in this algorithm for the online travel agencies. We didn't have the opportunity to do it because we simply did not have the capital. So finally, we're very satisfied because we did meet and we did pass our KPI for this year as a team. Next year, we will be closing our investment, hopefully, and we're looking at 1.7 million revenues for next year, and all the way up to 17 million a year in 2025. We'll have a percentage of margin which will be around 32%, so very, very high margin, because we're a service company. And some of our services are provided by intermediating with other providers abroad. So this is why we have this high margins, let's say, on our business.
I had to say you are very lean in the way how you manage your company, which is I really appreciate. And where do you see Ambimed in 5 years' time?
Well, where do I see Ambimed in 5 years' time? I hope that Ambimed will be something that automatically, physiologically, will become a part of traveling for all Italians, because we do not have competitors, and because the pandemic in general taught us something very important, that when we go abroad, we always encounter some kind of contamination, which can be positive or can be negative. Therefore, I believe that in 5 years from now, we will manage to build the barriers to entry for future competitors that might see the market that we saw 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago now, and might be trying to follow our tracks. So if we manage to build those barriers, I see us consolidating the leadership in this market, and perhaps being able at that point to look at other markets, hopefully.
Ambimed is full online, for what is my understanding. Are you going to have some physical presence one day or not?
Well, we would like to have physical presence, but I think that we will be looking at that in our second round. Our first round is a round that will be needed to develop the algorithm in order to consolidate the concepts that I described to you. Once we can see how those concepts convert, how the investment converts in revenues and margins and so on, then it will not be a problem to raise more capital and keep another component of the value chain, which is the medical structures. At that point, it will make sense to have our own clinic, to have our own doctors employed in our company in order to go and get that last piece of the value chain that currently we cannot, let's say, take in ourselves. That's how I see the future.
I mean, how do you see the healthcare system and the national healthcare system in Italy, and one day if you go abroad outside Italy, can be your competitor or can be someone who you can work with? Neutral.
No, working with the public sector, I would like to, but it's not very frequent in Italy. The private sector doesn't really exist according to the public sector. The private sector is a enforcement to the public sector. That's how they conceive us. So for Italy, I wouldn't say, although I'm very proud of my country and of the service that it provides to our people, because during COVID-19, we have seen the Italian healthcare system work very, very well. So I'm very proud of this, but in order to work with, let's say, governmental healthcare structures, I think we will to wait for other markets to expand internationally.
Matteo, thank you very much for coming to BizTalk. It's been a very great pleasure for me having you.
Thank you, Max. Thank you. Anytime.